Hello and welcome to another episode of Conscious Living, where we air here in Vancouver every Wednesday at 6 p.m. on 100.5 FM CFRO Co-op Radio. And my name is Marc Caron, happy to share different parts of consciousness and what's happening in the world and what people are doing to make a difference in their communities. From this episode is really quite interesting because we're going to talk about children and parents in the family unit, which we don't always talk about necessarily on Conscious Living. And I'm happy to introduce a friend who I haven't seen in quite some years since that crazy thing happened in like 2020. And her name is Hila Russ-Woodland. She's a founder of a great organization called, sorry, she works with the New World Network. That's right. I was thinking about Heart Journeys is when we first met. Now, Hila has over 20 years of teaching and facilitating experience and has been leading educational programs for all ages, including a Learning Pods alternative schooling for 6 to 26 children and youth camps, and devoted to dialogue of peacemaking through creative arts. In the past 10 years, she's run these programs outdoors and indoor licensed spaces, generating up to amount every year. Because we're not here to talk about money, but we are here to talk about how community is our immunity. Welcome to the program, Hila. It's great to see you. It's been a long time.
Thank you, Marc. It's so lovely to be here. And just before we're recording, we talked about this beautiful house that you were managing that held events, community events, almost every 2 other week or so. And that brought up so much joy and excitement to people in our local community. It brought healers to share their beautiful gifts with the community. It was an amazing project, and I look forward to more of that.
Well, we had a lot of fun there, and we did a lot of great work. And I remember, I'll never forget the time when you came and did your event, and it was based on art. And all of a sudden, we're drawing and doing art stuff like we were kids again. And for me, it was a really interesting experience because it was so almost foreign, yet it brought me back to being a kid again. And I thought it was a really well done program. And I thank you for that experience to kind of reawaken some of my creativity in that. So thank you for that. And thank you for the reminiscing down memory lane on that.
You're welcome. Well, Heart Journey Circles were a big event, and we all go on our journey and at some point forget who we truly are. And the purpose of those circles was to remind ourselves of our creative energy and our ability to follow our heart desires outside of our conditioning. And I remember having a few circles, but one of them I'll never forget. There was this woman that came all the way from Abbotsford. And as soon as we started with the exercises where I would trick you into not seeing what you're drawing or whatever it is that we were creating with artistic tools, she started to cry. She started to cry and she said, "It's been so long since I actually held a pencil or a marker." And, you know, it's so important for us to stay in touch with that part in us that is childlike, that is uncensored, that is untamed. And it helps us overcome the fears, isn't that so?
Well, it's so true. And it makes me think about, when you're a kid, you don't care. You go play in the rain. It doesn't matter that it's raining. You jump in the puddles. You do all sorts of crazy things. You draw all sorts of things that make no sense but are fun and exciting, and that you get a kick out of. Yeah, as we get older, serious, become adults, and everything kind of all of a sudden starts falling into these slots and rules and expectations so we can be accepted by society and our culture and what's going on in the world. Now, before we get going and dive into the nature of our conversation today, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself, Hila, in terms of your history, your experience, and what brought you to what you're working on today, especially, as you mentioned, the heart journey work that you're doing and that I got to experience myself. But you're working on the New Earth Network as well. So maybe you can kind of start by telling us a little bit about who you are and your story and how you got to this place.
Yeah, the question of who am I is actually a very deep and profound question. So I'll just answer on the superficial side of it. So I'm a teacher with over 30 years of experience. I'm an educator and a group facilitator. I'm a mother, and I've started teaching many years ago. And when I moved to Canada, I'm from Israel, and I got all kind of questions about the Middle East and what is happening there, and I realized, oh wow, I better get more educated about my own history and the place that I'm from. And at the same time, I had a very deep desire to bring people together on the theme of dialogue and peacemaking. And funny enough, moving from Israel to Canada, it's the first time that I met Palestinians people here. And of course, this is a very neutral background, and we had very interesting conversations. And we came together as a not for profit with a woman named Rina Lazar, who was the director of the project, and created Piece It Together. And for 3 summers, we brought youth from Israel, from Palestine, combined with Canadian youth for summer camps. And the essence of the summer camps were to create a safe space for dialogue and with creative artistic tools to have the kids work together and collaborate, and then realize that, as I quote one of the people who was organizing similar camps in the States, an enemy is a person who we haven't heard their story yet. When they got together face to face, waking up in the morning, making meals together, working on their projects together, they forgot that they're from different countries, that they're from different religions, that there was supposed to be animosity. I mean, it wasn't that simple. The first few days was a very intense process of compassionate listening and sharing stories. And, we were trained as facilitators to work with people from war-torn zone, and that's a very specific work. So that really got me on a path of wanting to do more for building bridges between communities and to raise more awareness of what's possible for us as human beings.
Mm, that's so beautiful. And, there's so much to unpack there in so many ways. And what came up to me specifically was when you're talking about people doing these creative projects and coming together, that, there's no, you're not caught up in the dogma or your beliefs or parts of society in terms of your structure, whatever that may be, when you're being really present and really focused and you're just being, boundaries and borders and all of those things disappear. And it's really interesting to see in today's world how, you would think as we get, smarter, wiser, more technical, that we'd be able to bridge these gaps in a much easier way. And when you talk about, peace initiatives and the things that many of us are working on, and I've been doing a bunch of work with a couple of groups that are really strong about their work in the peace movement and how important that is, because at the end of the day, we all want peace, right?
Absolutely. And when we get out of our comfort zone and out of our usual context, it's an opportunity. First of all, there's a place of, feeling a bit confused. And those children, I mean, I'm calling them children, they were like between 14 and 17. they were faced with some deep questions for themselves. Like, who am I listening to at home? What are the conditions that I grew up with? Is it true?
Yeah,
And
that's a powerful statement. Like what you're saying right there is, it's like that adoption of beliefs and values without actually consciously choosing that for yourself,
that's
right?
right.
It's like imprinted on you based on, where you live in the world and a number of different factors, but it's profound what you're saying there.
Yeah, because I believe most of us are born sort of like a clean slate. Of course, we have our own character to some extent, and those of you who are listening and have children, you know that. But at the same time, we're like sponges, and we really take in everything that comes first from the core family unit that we are brought up in, and then in our neighborhood, in our schools, in our society, and of course, as you mentioned, Mark, technology. I mean, the television when we grew up was such a big influence on our psyche, knowingly or unknowingly, consciously or unconsciously, right? There's so many messages, most of them subliminal, that we were taking in. And then later on, you wake up and like, wait a minute, is this what love is all about? Is this what relationships are about? Who am I? How am I supposed to do this thing called life, right?
Right? Yes. So true.
And I think we're living in a very auspicious time of mass awakening. And I mean, your program and conscious living radio and network is all about that. And as we're awakening to our true self, it's really a beautiful time to reflect and to dig deeper in how are we doing as human beings? What does it mean to be pure human? I mean, science haven't really gotten into the complexity of human brain, human mind. I don't know if you follow Greg Braden. He's one of my favorite.
I know some of his work. We actually had him on the program a number of years ago, actually a few times, and I had the opportunity to speak with him when Tash was on the program. So yeah, I'm very familiar with his
He's
work.
so eloquent and he bridges science and spirituality in the most beautiful way I've ever heard. And recently, he's been talking a lot about, first of all, the power of our heart. The scientists in the Heart Math Institute have discovered that our heart have about 40,000 neurons, or like nervous system that is more powerful than our brain. And
Yeah,
this
I
is
call it the heart brain. It's got your brain has its own little heart, right?
exactly, the heart-brain coherence is the optimum way for us to be in terms of functioning, right? And in terms of our perception and the way we want to relate to the world, to ourselves and to the world. And so, where were we?
Well,
This
we're talking about heart
really-
coherence, and I think one of the things I learned many years ago in regards to this science was how easy it is to really balance the heart and the brain.
Yes,
As simple as hands on your heart, close your eyes, taking some deep breaths, take 10 breaths, take a minute or two, and just relax into that.
exactly.
And
In my heart journey circles, we used to start with putting our hand on our heart, close our eyes, and find three words that are beautiful and inspiring, like gratitude, kindness, appreciation, and just repeat them a few times, and boom, you're dropping into your heart and you're here now. And everything that you had, kind of the chatter in your mind, what did you have for dinner, what I'm going to do tomorrow, everything disappears. And you're really just aware, just fully aware and very conscious about who's in front of you and what's happening. And there's more, I think we're more open to listen and take in other people with really open heart and suspending our judgment. And that's like a portal to another dimension when we think about it, right? When we drop our judgments, our criticism, our all the things that prevents us from just seeing things from what they are, it's really a different game.
Well, I love what you're talking about judgment. And I think it's a really important principle and practice to, discard that, seek to understand and appreciate the other person's world. You don't have to agree with them, but you're listening. You're there. You're not judging them. And to me, judgment, you can analyze situations as you understand them and things, but it's to not put other people down so you can feel better about yourself, right? And creating that space where you're actually listening. You're not waiting to, put your imprint on that and just listen. And this is one of the things you talked about, the safe space earlier. And, you talked about the house that we had where we did events. And that was the goal, is to create a safe space, a safe, sacred space where people can be free to be themselves with no judgment and a radical acceptance in that sense, because that's when we all shine, right?
Absolutely. And one of the powerful tools that we use, for example, in our youth camps was the nonviolent communication or compassionate communication by Marshall Rosenberg. And I highly recommend for your listeners to grab that book and read it. It is amazing. You can look up on YouTube. Marshall Rosenberg, he has some, he has passed a few years ago, but there's some wonderful workshops that he has put on YouTube. And to be honest, when my son and I had some like really intense arguments this winter break, I said to him, okay, you know what? We have to watch this workshop. I'd like you to watch it with me, and then let's see how we feel after and how can we approach our arguments or our disagreements from that perspective. And it's quite simple. It's really about getting in touch with our emotions and observe. So, Krishnamurti used to say that observation is the highest form of human capability. And it's not that easy. We can say, oh, I've observed, but you know how much we can be so reactive when we're triggered. So, really, like breathing, observing, noticing, feeding back is something that I wish I was taught at school, right?
Right.
Would my life would be different if I would only be taught that simple thing, to observe, to get in touch with my emotions, to have a simple request once I know what my needs are, right?
Beautifully said. And, I think that's a great segue into the work that you're now doing with the New Earth Network. And, you know, basically you guys are open and to working to decentralize and bring groups of parents together who wish to see all children healthy, natural, and free, right? You inspire families to be resilient and trust their own inner guidance. How beautiful is that? And your vision, I just want to share with our listeners, is about choice and freedom of values, villages raising children, commitment to future generations, and retribing into hyper-local societies with a mission to present and share new possibilities of schooling, which I'm really excited to talk about, assisting and empowering parents to create learning pods. So I want to talk more about that and learn more about that, because I think it's a great concept and idea what you're doing there, and producing educational programs and events that support communities with any challenges. So thank you for doing this work, as I think it's really paramount. And it takes me back to what you said about TV when we were growing up. Not that we're going to age ourselves, right? But now, we were lucky. I grew up with one channel, and then we got three, and then we got, more. And now we've got how many channels with nothing on, and the world's communicating instantaneously around the globe at any time, anywhere, any place with the power of this little device right here. So the world has changed. Yet now I can't speak for being a parent because that I am not, though I know people who have kids, and I've got friends and hear their stories about what's going on in the schooling system today. So I want to hear what you're doing to improve that, to find a better way to better educate the future generations of this world.
Yes, so myself and Michael Fraser are the co-founders of the New Earth Network. And, it's been many years as a teacher that I have made the choice to leave the public system for many reasons and start my own educational programs. So in 2011, I formed In Wonderland, and I have after school care, education, summer camps, and outdoor nature education programs. To me, you know, as we grow and evolve, it's very important to challenge the old systems. And the school system, the way I've seen it and experienced it from within, doesn't serve us anymore. In fact, it is very harmful for children. So NASA was conducting a survey. I think it was back in the late 60s, and they wanted to find out more about children's genius and what happens to it throughout our schooling years. So they found out that in kindergarten, children's genius, and that meant um, looking into problem solving, creativity, um, innovation, it was up to 93%. And without getting into the whole survey, at the later years of our schooling, it drops down 40%, Mark. It's shocking. One would think that if we go through a beautiful education system, then, we are supported, we're encouraged, we can become who we truly are and be the genius that we were born to be. But no, in fact, schools are dumbing children down. Another author that I would highly recommend for your audience is John Taylor Gatto. John was a teacher in New York State. In fact, he won 3 times Teacher of the Year. And what he discovered in the late years of his career is that the way the elite are teaching their children is very different than how things are run in the public system. And he was trying to implement some of their methods into the public school system, meaning supporting the children in his classroom to become more entrepreneurial, free thinkers, critical thinkers, going out to the world and having projects outside of the school system and the classroom. So he was very advanced in his thinking. In fact, his book, Weapon of Mass Instruction, was one of the best sellers. And again, I highly
Catchy
recommend,
title.
isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you bring up a number of interesting points that I think are really important. And first off, you're just talking about the elite educating their children differently, and then the public school systems, how they're doing it, and how it hasn't really evolved over, the decades probably since we went to school. But it's part of that entrainment, I think. And it's just my belief from what I know and what I experienced growing up, that we're in the public schools are teaching us not necessarily critical thinking, how to think, how to problem solve, because if all of a sudden you need help, what do you do in the real world today? If I need help with something, I ask my friend. We need help with production here today when we do this kind of podcast and show that we're doing now. My friend Michael helped. And I want to thank Michael for that. But we ask for help. Where in school, when we ask for help on our friends, we're cheating, you know? So it's this weird way that we're been conditioned to learn and to respond and really to conform is how I see it to what you're saying. And talked about critical thinking, and you mentioned a number of books and authors. And one book I highly recommend that I want to just put out there because he talks about this. And most people and many people know Napoleon Hill through his book, Think and Grow Rich. But
Yes.
there's a book he wrote in 1938 that was not released until 2011. And it's called Outwitting the Devil. And it's basically a book. The premise of the book is it's a conversation and an interview of Napoleon Hill interviewing the devil. And they didn't publish it because of what he was saying. They were afraid that because he was talking about schools, institution, government, medical, all these things that many people are now starting to realize to be kind of true from all the conspiracy theorists out there, um, that they were afraid for their lives. So they didn't release this book. And it's the one thing that the devil is, I know you can't hear me or see me if you're listening on the radio here, but I'm doing the air quotes. You know, he talks about the biggest power that we have as human beings is our free thinking and the ability to think for ourselves and make our own decisions and to be clear about what we want with the right information. And there's so many parts in this book. It's a great read. It's fascinating, in my opinion. But it's interesting to see what he was saying in 1938 to what's relevant in today's world. It's been out for just over 10 years. And it's an incredible work that I think everybody should listen to because it talks about exactly what you're speaking of, that
Mark, secret societies for eons of times knew the power of mind control. The Jesuits used to say, "Give me the child and I'll show you the man," right?
yeah.
Hitler used to say, "Whoever controls the youth controls the nation." So we know that children are so easy to be, they're so impressionable, right? And they're so malleable. And whatever you tell them at a young age and repeat, 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 they just take it on as who they are and what they are thinking.
Well,
I
that
mean,
blank slate you were talking about earlier, right?
yes. And I hear a lot from parents, some kind of feedback sometimes that they're saying, I'm so frustrated. My child come back from school and he said, and I tell them something, and then they say, no, but my teacher said blah, blah, blah. And they're already taking on what their teachers are saying as more important than their own parents. And this is another issue that I think is something that we're very unconscious about. I always say in my presentations and my public speaking, as a parent, do we ever stop to think how many hours our children are spending with other people that we don't even know much about?
And
We
you're
drop
not
our
who's
kids in.
controlling that drawing on the slate, right?
Totally. We give our power away. And, the government and the, let's call them the deep states, they count on that because that's how they indoctrinate our children through the public systems, more and more so in the past few years. And another side of this is that humanity, most of us, are into the matrix, into the enslavement program. We have to be successful. We have to make money. We have to get a job. And what is a job? A 9 to 5. So, okay, now I have a job. I have a family. I have mortgage. And all people are do, they are like almost in a trauma response. They're in fight or flight. They're not even seeing their children. They're so worried. They live out of fears. They drop off the child early in the morning, pick them up, good case scenario in 3 in the afternoon, but usually it's after 5. So from early in the morning until late in the afternoon, the children are not with their parents. And how important that is for them to be with parents in a young age. That's extremely important. So and then, dinner, rush, rush, rush. press repeat. And then come teenagers years and parents complain, it's like, what happened? Why is my child like that? I cannot recognize my child. Of course not. You gave him away. You gave her away to the system. They don't know who you are. You don't know who they are. We spend so little quality time with our children that that's part of the inversions and insanity that we're witnessing in our society in the past few decades. And it's not easy to speak about it because I do not want to blame and shame parents, because we all have to take care of our lives and the material world that we're living in, and paying our um, loans and commitments, whatever we have. And at the same time, I think that right now, it's imperative for us to rethink relationships. It's a relationship with ourselves, with our children, with our neighbors, with our families, with our local community.
Wow. You struck on so many things that I completely support, you and your work and what you're saying, because I believe much of the same. And when you've got a situation, and I had a great conversation with a mutual friend of ours the other day, and we were talking about the youth and how people are growing up, and what we went through in 2020 for a few years, and the impact that that also has. Now, I'd like to think that there's an impact and there was also a benefit, because as people kind of became isolated and staying together, there's, if you had a family unit, you had some time with your family, but it was certainly a different world than what we grew up with. And you growing up in Israel, you saw a different thing than me just growing up as Canadian. The world is changing. And I think there was a great statement someone that I heard many, many years ago when the internet was coming out, and where, you've got the knowledge information coming out at rates, that history has never seen before. And you've got children tapped into their phones, you've got all of this information coming at them, and they've got less guidance to make, let's say, good decisions or great decisions. And when you're talking about being imprinted by the public school systems and things of that nature, I think that there's a lot that we can do to, support a different education, a new world education. And when you talk about the world today, parents dropping their kids off early for school, picking them up late after work to pay their bills, going to jobs they don't like, they don't love, and they're caught in the matrix, as you were saying. And then we wonder why we have such mental health problems with depression. Because if you're getting up to go to work to do all these things and you're rugging yourself ragged just to pay your bills so you can have stuff in the material world, like you were saying, what kind of a strain does that put on the family system? And I love about your work is about, you talk about villages raising children and, finding new possibilities of schooling. So maybe you can tell us about what you're doing there, and the pods program that you're working on to bring a different level of education and a different style of education. Because this is the same thing, I think we've all heard, children who have different learning styles. Everybody's system and taught the same way, but not everybody learns the same, right?
Very true. Since 2020, there was a huge change for parents, and due to some of them were afraid from the pandemic, and some of them were actually more concerned about the mandates that were imposed due to the alleged pandemic. So it created a very interesting scenario. But the fact is that homeschooling in Canada almost doubled itself in the past few years. So it goes to show that a lot of people became disillusioned, and perhaps due to spending more time with their children and enjoying that and seeing the benefits of that, or perhaps due to really being disappointed for how the schools responded to the so-called COVID pandemic and noticed that schools were actually damaging their children, whether it was um, forcing them to wear masks all the time, which created some rushes and really were hard for the kids to breathe, and were also not very hygienic the way they did it, anyways. And also the whole distancing protocols. I mean, this is unnatural to the human nature, and to ask that from children was completely outrageous. And and the fear mongering, some of the children under my care were so afraid to touch things, or they would say things like, no, no, I don't want to kill my grandpa or grandma. I mean, what we went through back then was dark times for humanity, and there's so many consequences to that and implications on many levels. But to go back to education, the silver lining was that many people um, chose homeschooling and even unschooling, and that can be very challenging.
Tell
And
us more about unschooling.
so unschooling is completely unplugging from the education system. Homeschooling, a family who chooses to do that are still accountable to some extent to their school district. So they have to follow part of the curriculum. So we are in BC. So the family would have to follow part of the BC curriculum and show some outcomes and topics covered. When you choose to unschool, and in Canada, you can certainly do that, you are on your own. It's like living off grid. You can do
Wow.
whatever you want, and you can live life according to your own rhythm, lifestyle, where you live. If you're, for example, in the countryside, if you're living on a farm and you have other duties that are part of that, then you don't have to accommodate school. You can learn as you live your life and doing your tasks, and this is part of your experiences as to get to know the world. It's like firsthand experiences and learning. And so back to the learning pods, Michael and I had a few events, and we were speaking to parents and educators, and we noticed that people really want to opt out for homeschooling and even unschooling, but they are afraid. And so we decided to unpack, what is this fear about? And we've discovered that there are a few things. So school is free, and people were afraid that it'll be costly to start homeschooling and perhaps cover expenses on their own. That was one thing. Another thing was, and it kind of related, they were afraid that they'll have to quit their jobs, and then what would be their, source of revenue to support their families. And another element was their self perception of not good enough. People were saying, what? I'm not a teacher. How can I teach my children? I don't know how to do it. And it's all valid. Those are all good points. And so Michael and I we're sitting for hours and hours and thinking, okay, we want to support families. We want to empower them. We want them to get in touch with that part within themselves that has an inner knowing. I mean, as parents, we are our children teachers from day one. We know how to do that. We just had to shift our perception. We just had to change our point of view. And Mark, in many other aspects of our life, we give our power away. So we give our power away to teachers, we give our power away to doctors, we give our power away to celebrities. So we lost our ability to sing and dance and study and heal ourselves just because we were taught that we're not good enough and we need experts. So part of the things that we do in our events that we called podlocks, those are learning pods potlucks. We actually talk more about self-development, self-exploration, and self-empowerment. So go back to the learning pods. What we offered back then since 2021 is a course, and it's online on our website. It's by donation. Those are 4 hours that people can take on their own time and pace to learn what is a learning pod, which is basically homeschooling families coming together to create their own mini school, and they are in charge. They can do it in their homes and rotate. They can find a church space or another communal space that they can get together. They can decide how many days they want to homeschool on their own with their kids and how many days they want to come together as a community of learners and what type of curriculum they want to choose together.
So
And
very self-directed.
absolutely, this is sovereign schooling.
And I think that's consciousness at its a very high level in that sense of awareness, choice, right
Exactly.
direction,
According
and
to their family's own core values.
yeah,
This is
and the
really
power. And you talked about people, the our personal power. We where you were talking about having lost that, to take that back and to teach our kids to have that.
absolutely.
Brilliant.
And it's also bonding back to the to the family unit. I mean, it's a whole conversation to discuss what has been done to the family unit in the past decades, and it's all by design. There are dark forces that are here to really harm humanity. And we know that there's attack on our humanness in so many ways. And this is why it's important to stay pure human, to really learn about ourselves and our beautiful abilities as human beings, how we relate, how we are compassionate, how beautiful we can learn in so many ways, how creative are we, the way we can collaborate with each other and create everything that our hearts desire. We can do it. We are creators. We're not victims to reality. And this is a huge thing to learn on our own and then to teach other people. And so with the learning pods, we encourage people to first of all get in touch with themselves and understand what are their core values. And then another beautiful part of it is that once they do that, they can design their learning pod as a small business. So people don't have to lose a source of income in order to homeschool or unschool. They can structure this type of learning pod as a mini school and as a business that a few people can take on and operate and offer to others who can still keep working if that's their choice. And then the last parts of our course are also very important. It's all about agreements and forms and coming together in understanding and commitment, because in order to create a vibrant community that is sustainable, you got to have commitment. And in order to have commitment, you want to have good connections and understanding and put things in writing. So if conflict occurs, we know how to tackle it and how to solve it with protocols and guidelines that we've created in advance. And then the last module talks about marketing. How do we find those like-minded people? Where do we market? How do we create marketing material? So this is really like a 4 hours of focused way of learning how to become empowered as parents, as families. This is also good for educators and anyone that actually wants to work with children and even wants to make it their own small business.
It makes so much sense what you're saying. To for me, it's just logical, and I love the idea that you even have a opportunity to what's the best word I'm looking for, but the business side of it.
Be
These things
entrepreneurial.
have to be sustainable, right? And that's that's the idea. It's like, how do we do this so that it works, so that it can be sustainable and repeatable, and most importantly, make a difference in the world. And the future of our world and the future of our planet are our kids. I got 20 plus years left if I'm lucky, knock on wood. and who's taken over after the next generation is gone, and how are we educating them, and what's going on there. So what you're saying there in terms, especially about choosing our values and beliefs, is something that's really um, part and parcel to my core belief systems, that we need to be able to choose our values and our beliefs consciously for ourselves, not just because of where we live or what's been imposed on us through church, state, family, whatever that is, because this is the beauty of the human condition, about how different we are, and how when we bring all of our gifts together, it makes to a synergistic, better world at the end of the day. And you're talking open, honest communication. And I love what you're talking about, guiding principles. So, how do we avoid, or how do we resolve conflict in a conscious, caring, compassionate way that is not about judgment, where we were talking about that in the beginning? You start judging, well, my way's better. And it's like, hang on, let's put that aside and listen. Let's seek to understand and
Yeah,
find common ground, I think is really important, versus just putting that divide, that separation. There's been so much separation happening in the world this decade. The 20s have been ridiculously unpredictable. Like, I never would have thought this in a million years was going to happen. And when it did, and then the level of separation and isolation, and then you look at politics and what's happening in the world, not just around the world, North America, Canada, US, the division that's happening is just bizarre. When we all say we all want peace, we all want togetherness, it makes no sense to me. Thank
exactly.
you for doing the work you're doing,
Oh, you're
because that's
welcome.
the future of what the world is facing.
Hmm. Thank you for saying that. It's you touched upon something so deep and profound, and is separation. And I think it's been a while that, let's call them the power that be, the power that are leaving, that have like constantly promoted the notion of separation on humanity, sort of inflicting that on us. So separating ourselves from our true nature, separating ourselves from our environment, what's around us, from nature, from the beauty of the elements and the forests and the oceans, the water, the sunshine, right? Everything became
Nature.
inverted. That's what they did. Mark, I tell you, I have some sad stories throughout the years when I take children outside, outdoors in my outdoor education programs. Some children are afraid to walk on the beach. They are not comfortable with sand. It's hard for them to get wet in the rain. They're so disconnected for what it means to be human being in this beautiful God-given world that we have around us, because they're so conditioned by their families, by commercials on TV, by dark
And that fear mongering you were talking about earlier. And it gets me to something. I don't mean to interrupt, Hila, but it's something I want to put out there, that it struck me. I was watching a podcast a while ago. Many people who know me know I've done a lot of work in the Tony Robbins world. And I love listening to what he has to say and what he teaches. And he was talking with Jordan Peterson, and what they discovered in some studies that were being done at Stanford, and what brought up, and it really clicked for me. And the key word was engagement. We stopped being engaged. People went within, they stick on their phones, they're not engaging in life. They're not engaging in nature. They're not engaging in each other. They're just very internal in terms of their world.
right
And what,
level of disconnect. Yes.
right, which is part of the separation and everything else. And it's when we engage, because we're social creatures, social animals. Our spirit is social. We're meant to connect and synergize, and that takes engagement, right? How
Absolutely.
do you
Synergize
engage
and
with
harmonize.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it really struck me that important part to be curious. And I couldn't imagine as a kid being afraid of walking on the sand on the beach. You would think they would be fascinated and curious, like, oh wow, for the first time or whatever it may be. So yeah, what a profound statement there. Wow.
Yeah, and it's like I feel it's my mission to reconnect children to the love of nature. I always say, let's raise children that know the names of trees and plants and fruits and vegetables, not
And
just
know how to grow them. And know how to grow
yeah,
them.
yeah, because we want to stay natural. There's a huge push for transhumanism, AI, and I'm not saying that AI is wrong, right, good, or bad, but it's in whose hands is it? And in any case, we are natural beings. So if we can use AI, that's wonderful, but let's never forget our true nature and nature around us and the beauty of it and how it affects us and enhances our well-being to such an extent that no other technology can. In fact, we are the technology. And again, I'll quote Greg Braden. He says, humans, we're the most complicated, wet technology. We are over 80% water. And water is sacred. Water is way beyond what we're taught at school. Water carries consciousness. Again, that's the topic for another podcast.
It really is, which is a
And
great
I'm sure
segue because
Michael will agree with us, right? He
yeah,
had a whole series on water.
yeah. But we need to wrap up, which is a great segue. The
Yes.
water is conscious, and I love what you're saying. I love the work you're doing, and in a minute or so, if you could just tell people how to learn more, where they can find your work, and if they're curious about, you know, changing the way that they may be educating their children, what do they need to do? Where can they find your work?
Yes, thank you. So we have a website, newearthnetwork.ca. However, this link is broken. There's an alternative link, and I hope you guys can put it
It's
where
already in the comments as we're
it's
airing right now. It's
great.
down there below with your Heart Journey New Earth Network. Yeah.
Great. So this is the link where they can see our course, sign up, take it. It's by donation from zero to hero. We don't follow up on that. We operate in the spirit of the gifting economy and of service to others. We also have an ebook which talks about, Mark, what you and I discussed of how to create a safe space and container, how to listen compassionately, how to create uh, uh, guidelines for a successful, thriving community, not just as for a learning pod, but for the whole community that is around the children. It's the families, it's neighbors, it's aunt and uncles, it's friends that want to be with the children and share from their own skills and talents. This is how it used to be. It's the village that raises the children, right? Now,
Beautiful. And we'll have, go ahead.
yes, about once a month, we're actually, because we believe in in-person um, setting, we hold what we call a podluck. It's a learning pods potluck.
You've got one local here in Vancouver, I see, on March 15th.
Yes, that's our next one. We were holding already, I don't know, 6 or 7 or
We'll
8.
have links for all of your websites, your programs, and the information that we've talked about here on our website at consciousliving.radio.org. Hila, I want to thank you. We've got to wrap up.
Okay.
I just really appreciate seeing you and having this conversation and seeing where you've gone in the past few years and the great work you're doing. So thank you for doing that on behalf of myself, Conscious Living Network, and the future of humanity. Thank you for the great work you're doing, Hila.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
My pleasure. Well, you've been listening to Conscious Living here on 100.5 FM CFRO Co-op Radio in Vancouver. My name is Marc Caron, and until next time, take care of each other, everyone. Bye for now.